Welcome to Verse and Vision, where we dive deep into stories through visual storytelling and thoughtful reflection. Today, we begin a journey into Debt of Bones by Terry Goodkind, the prequel to the Sword of Truth series, a tale of magic, war, and sacrifice, setting the stage for an epic struggle between light and darkness. Our story follows Abby, a young woman standing on the precipice of hope and despair, seeking an audience with the powerful First Wizard. As she clutches a simple burlap sack, the weight of the world rests in her hands. She doesn't just seek help, she seeks a miracle. But even as she waits, her mother's warning haunts her. When it comes to wizards, you can't even trust what you see. In the midst of war and chaos, Abby will learn that magic isn't the only thing to fear. The sky is streaked with the golden hues of the low sun as Abby's gaze follows a distant flock of whistling swans gliding effortlessly past the dark stone walls of the Wizard's Keep. The majestic white birds seem out of place against the grim structure, their elegance a contrast to the imposing bastions, soaring towers, and arched bridges of the keep. Torchlight flickers along the walls, casting restless shadows, making the very stones appear alive and watchful. It feels as though the keep itself has been staring back at Abby all day, adding to the weight in her heart. Abby hugs the worn burlap sack close to her chest, shifting slightly on the stone bridge where she has been waiting for hours. She feels small and insignificant, dwarfed by the sheer size of the keep and the enormity of her purpose for being there. Every moment spent standing on this bridge tightens the knot of anxiety growing within her. The sound of shuffling skirts pulls Abby out of her thoughts. A hunched old woman inches closer, her wrinkled face split by a grin that reveals a gap where a tooth used to be. Her tongue flicks through the space briefly before she speaks.
"What do you have in that sack, dearie?"
The old woman asks with a sly curiosity, her gaze flicking between Abby and the bulging shape of the burlap sack. Startled, Abby pulls the sack closer to her body, her hands tightening around it protectively. "Just some of my things, that's all," she replies softly, shrinking slightly from the woman's scrutiny. The woman's weathered face twists with a knowing grin, her suspicion undeterred. "Something precious, is it?" she presses, leaning closer, her leathery hand brushing against Abby's sleeve. Before Abby can answer, a stern officer marches past, trailed by a column of weary guards and assistants. The group moves with precision, the clink of armor and boots on the stone bridge reverberating in the cool evening air. Abby and the other supplicants instinctively shift closer to the side, though the soldiers have ample space to pass. The officer ignores the salutes of the bridge guards, his gaze locked forward, as if the weight of countless battles leaves no room for acknowledgement. The soldiers bear the scars of recent conflict, uniforms marked with soot, dirt, and blood, faces hardened by exhaustion. Abby notices two officers from her homeland of Penderson Reach among the passing soldiers. They look young, not much older than boys, but war has worn away their youth prematurely, leaving behind faces etched with the beginnings of adulthood, raw and scarred. Abby's thoughts drift to the many figures she has seen during her journey, sorceresses draped in flowing robes, council members moving purposefully, and even confessors, their dark, satiny dresses hinting at the power they carry. She remembers catching glimpses of the sprawling confessor's palace below the mountain, its white stone shimmering in the distance. The palace, a beacon of authority for the Midlands, feels both beautiful and daunting. As she recalls her childhood, a vivid memory surfaces, the only time she ever saw a confessor up close. The woman had visited Abby's mother, and at 10 years old, Abby had been mesmerized by the confessor's long, luxurious hair falling halfway down her back. In her small town of Coney Crossing, no woman wore her hair that long. Even now, Abby lowers her gaze, remembering her mother's warnings not to meet the gaze of a confessor directly. Though her mother insisted that only the deliberate touch of a confessor could seize control of a person's mind, Abby never dared test the truth of those words. The old woman watches the soldiers march into the keep and leans closer to Abby once more. Her voice drops to a conspiratorial whisper. "You'd do better to bring a bone, dearie. Wizards don't care for what some country girl brings them. They've got all the salt pork they need." Her cracked lips twist into a knowing smirk. Better to sell your things and hope you have enough to buy a bone. Favors from wizards don't come easy, even for those doing their bidding. Abby shifts uncomfortably, gripping her sack tighter. The woman's sharp eyes catch the shape of something beneath the burlap, and her grin widens. Or is it a jug? That what you've got in there, dearie? A jug you made? Abby nods reluctantly. Yes, a jug I made. The old woman hums in satisfaction, but her expression turns sly as she tugs on Abby's sleeve, revealing a simple bracelet of interwoven wires. Might fetch you the price of a proper bone, that bracelet. No good to hold on to sentiment out here. Abby pulls her arm back protectively. It was my mother's. It has no value but to me. The old woman's smile deepens, her brown eyes gleaming under her woolen head wrap. The spirits say there's no stronger power than a mother's want to protect her child. Abby's voice is soft but resolute. The spirits know the truth of that. Unnerved by the woman's persistence, Abby glances around the bridge for some reprieve from the conversation. The yawning chasm beneath the bridge makes her dizzy, and the sight of the towering keep only adds to her anxiety. She shifts her gaze to the other supplicants gathered at the head of the bridge, pretending to study their faces. Men and women stand in small huddles, murmuring quietly, their expressions a mixture of fear, worry, and resignation. Abby adjusts her cloak around her shoulders, trying to shake off the unease settling over her. She pulls the last piece of bread from her pocket, nibbling on it absent-mindedly as the weight of her mission presses harder against her heart. The city of Aidendrill below teems with life, but Abby has never felt so alone. In Coney Crossing, she knew every face, every story. But here, among strangers and towering walls, she feels lost. The enormity of her task looms large. Her home depends on her success. And yet, standing here, with the keep towering above and the old woman's words lingering in her mind, Abby feels the creeping doubt begin to gnaw at her resolve. The wind brushes through her dark brown hair, carrying the faint scent of smoke from distant hearths. Abby hugs the burlap sack closer to her chest, as if holding it will steady the storm of emotions swirling within her. She knows that if she fails here, there will be no home left to return to. But even with that knowledge, the path before her feels impossibly daunting. All eyes turn toward the keep as the heavy rattle of hooves thundered across the bridge. Massive horses, dark and muscular, charged forward, carrying men adorned in polished armor, chainmail, and flowing banners that marked their ranks. Dust and gravel scattered in their wake, sparkling in the late afternoon sun as they crossed the bridge. The sight of the Sanderian lancers, fearsome and commanding, stirred Abby's awe, momentarily distracting her from her anxieties. But the awe quickly faded as Abby realized these men, no matter how brave, were not her true hope. Her heart sank with the weight of reality. The wizard was her only chance, and even that hope seemed to slip further away with each passing moment. Abby turned just in time to see a statuesque woman stepping out from the massive stone wall of the keep. The woman's fair skin glowed against her dark hair, which fell just to her shoulders, and her simple flaxen robes bore delicate beadwork in ancient symbols, marking her as a sorceress. At the sight of her, the murmur of voices fell to silence, and even the guards respectfully made way. The sorceress bowed her head to the waiting supplicants, her voice calm yet laced with authority. Please forgive us for keeping you waiting the entire day. This delay is due to the war, and it's unavoidable. We mean no disrespect. A man behind Abby asked about the war, and the sorceress's gaze softened. With the blessings of the good spirits, it will end soon. Her words were careful, her expression unwavering as she scanned the crowd. As the sorceress invited the supplicants to follow, 3 men abruptly moved to the front of the line, pushing past the old woman. One, an older man in rich robes, glanced dismissively at Abby and the others as he took his place. His hooded eyes gleamed with entitlement, a silent threat to anyone who might challenge him. The old woman's hand fell away, her protests silenced under the noble's cold stare. Abby, feeling the man's eyes upon her, swallowed nervously, not daring to voice any objections. The hope of her mission was too fragile to risk in a confrontation. As they moved forward, Abby felt a sudden warmth emanate from the bracelet around her wrist, an unusual sensation that hadn't occurred since her mother's death. Her fingers brushed over it, her heart stirring with a mixture of hope and trepidation. Beside her, the old woman leaned closer, whispering ominously about the nature of wizards and sorceresses. Mean they are, as cold as a winter's night. Abby clutched the burlap sack tighter, praying silently for strength and courage. The group moved under the massive iron portcullis, entering the courtyard beyond. Abby felt a surprising warmth fill the air despite the chill of autumn. Surrounded by the high, dark stone walls of the keep, she felt both trapped and captivated by the architecture, which seemed to defy the natural elements. Her mother's cautions echoed in her mind. You can't trust even what you see when it comes to wizards. The sorceress led them through a grand doorway adorned with pink-flecked granite and into a vast anteroom unlike anything Abby had ever seen. Red marble columns supported high balconies, and a central fountain sprayed water that cascaded down through scalloped bowls. The grandeur of the room left her momentarily breathless, yet her anxiety overshadowed any marvel she might have felt. In the quieter room beyond, the sorceress gestured for them to sit. Abby, exhausted, sank onto the bench, finally feeling some relief in her weary bones. Her gaze drifted to the tapestries adorning the wall, depicting a grand procession. The intricate designs should have evoked wonder, yet her mind remained heavy with worry. In the center of the room lay an elaborate design, a grace, a brass-lined depiction of circles, squares, and a star. Each shape held symbolic meaning, the outer circle for the spirit world, the square for the boundary of life and death, and the star representing the Creator's light. Abby's eyes lingered on the design, but her heart tightened. She felt an inevitable fate looming, a destiny she feared would leave her condemned to darkness. In a dimly lit chamber, the sorceress addressed the line of anxious supplicants with calm authority. Hands folded, cautioning them on the importance of brevity in their petitions due to the strains of war. Her tone was practical, stressing that each wizard's duty was to serve the greater good, even if that meant turning away personal requests. She observed the line, but not a soul backed down, least of all Abby. With lives depending on her plea, Abby rose to her feet, determined. "Please, mistress," Abby's voice broke through the tense silence. The sorceress turned her unsettling gaze upon her, yet Abby held her ground. She requested a meeting with none other than the first wizard, Zedicus Zul Zoranda. Skepticism flashed in the sorceress's eyes, but Abby's response was unwavering. She withdrew a beaded neckband from her mother's robes, stepping into the grace with a reverent kiss. "I am Abigail, born of Helsa. Lives are at stake." The sorceress acknowledged her request with a steady nod, and Abby felt a flicker of hope. Yet, before she could exhale her relief, the old woman and 3 other men demanded to see the first wizard as well. One man, cloaked in wealth and arrogance, seemed to challenge anyone who dared defy him. The sorceress warned them all of the first wizard's formidable reputation, nicknamed the Wind of Death, yet no one faltered. Steeling themselves, the chosen few followed the sorceress deeper into the keep. As they passed through grand corridors and narrow, dimly lit halls, Abby took in the sights. Soldiers of the Home Guard, their red tunics and dark armor adding to the foreboding atmosphere. At last, they reached a luxuriously furnished waiting room, lined with thickly tufted leather chairs. Abby sat alone, clutching her burlap sack, her mind torn between what she would say and the chilling nickname, the Wind of Death. Abruptly, the double doors opened. The sorceress reappeared, and the noble sprang to his feet, demanding entry first. Abby's instinct to protest was quickly tempered by the old woman, who gently urged her to let the men pass. The doors closed, leaving Abby and the old woman in tense silence. Moments later, a flash of light and a sudden crack reverberated through the doors. The room fell silent as they swung open, revealing the noble's attendants carrying his severed head, his face frozen in a horrified scream. Blood dripped onto the marble floor, a grim reminder of the risks they faced. Stunned, Abby clutched her sack tighter as the old woman hurriedly excused herself, wishing Abby luck before leaving. The sorceress approached Abby, offering a final opportunity to turn back. Trembling yet resolute, Abby shook her head. She could not leave. With a sigh, the sorceress led her forward, the weight of destiny heavy on her shoulders. They entered the first wizard's chamber, a chaotic hive of activity. People argued, pored over maps, munched on snacks, and gestured wildly. Abby's gaze darted around, overwhelmed, as the sorceress warned her that the first wizard would listen despite the noise and distractions. Abby nodded, though her unease grew as they wove through the crowd. Then, from across the room, Abby caught sight of a figure in a flowing white gown, her violet eyes piercing through the chaos. Abby's heart raced as she fell to her knees, recognizing the Mother Confessor herself, whose mere presence commanded awe and fear. "Rise, my child," the Mother Confessor's voice rang clear, an acknowledgement that left Abby both humbled and terrified. The sorceress soon guided Abby to the center of the commotion, introducing her to the first wizard. Expecting an old, fearsome figure, Abby instead found herself staring into hazel eyes framed by a young, gentle face. His appearance was humble, his robes simple, his demeanor calm amidst the cacophony. Yet his eyes, wise, intense, and world-weary, seemed to pierce into her very soul. For a brief, surreal moment, amidst the bustling noise and flurry of voices around them, it felt as though Abby was alone with the first wizard, his undivided attention focused solely on her. In the face of such wisdom and power, Abby felt small, but a fire burned within her, a resolve that no wizard or danger could extinguish. The first wizard observed her in silence, his gaze steady, as if he saw not only her fears but the strength within her. She couldn't turn back now. Her journey had only just begun. If you love our work, please subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications to follow Abby's journey in Part 2.